Imagine being trapped alone in a lighthouse, miles away from civilization, when suddenly you realize you're not alone. Welcome to Horror Spectrums. Tonight, we'll explore terrifying true lighthouse horror stories that'll make you rethink the safety of the shore. Turn off your lights, get comfortable, and subscribe if you dare. I still remember the very first words Mr. Thompson said to me when I arrived at the lighthouse, a weary look on his aged face as he handed me the keys. He said, "There are places the sea claims, boy, and people it never lets go." I did not understand his words then, dismissing them as the ramblings of an old, tired keeper eager to leave his post. The lighthouse stood lonely on a rocky cliff, overlooking waves that never rested, always whispering in the dark. My first few nights passed quietly, marked only by the rhythm of light circling in the dark sky. But soon, a strange feeling began to settle deep within me. Small things at first, easily ignored. A door left open when I was certain I had closed it, footprints in places where mine had not been, and the constant sensation of being watched. Each night became heavier, and my dreams grew restless. It was during one such night I woke abruptly, certain I'd heard someone whisper my name. I listened carefully, heart pounding, but only the wind spoke outside. The following day, I found old records left behind by previous keepers tucked away in a forgotten drawer. One entry caught my eye, scribbled hastily in fearful handwriting. It spoke of Frederick A. Jordan, the lighthouse keeper who drowned mysteriously many years ago, swept into the ocean during a fierce storm, never to be seen again. Subsequent keepers wrote of seeing him, a shadowy figure pacing the edge of the rocks at night, or hearing faint cries carried by the wind. I brushed it off as superstition, but deep down, unease stirred. Days passed, and my anxiety grew as the oddities became more frequent. Tools vanished only to reappear later in impossible places, and lanterns extinguished without explanation, plunging me into suffocating darkness. One evening, while standing watch, I glimpsed a figure standing near the cliff's edge, motionless against the pale moonlight. My blood turned cold. I called out, thinking it might be a lost fisherman, but the figure simply vanished before my eyes, dissolving into mist carried off by the wind. My courage faltered, but duty held me firm. I began spending my nights with one eye always looking behind, jumping at every creak and whisper. Sleep became a stranger, and exhaustion made my mind fragile. On a stormy night, as waves crashed furiously against the rocks, I woke to the thunderous sound of knocking on the lighthouse door. Grabbing my lantern, I hurried down, heart racing wildly. Opening the door revealed nothing but empty darkness and roaring wind. Then, softly yet unmistakably, I heard my name whispered again, close to my ear. Spinning around, the shadows seemed alive, moving just beyond my sight. Fear clutched my throat, and I knew then I was not alone. Panic surged through me as memories of Jordan's fate filled my thoughts. The storm outside intensified, echoing my terror. Suddenly, the light above flickered and died, plunging everything into complete blackness. I stumbled desperately upward, feeling my way blindly through the suffocating gloom, the air thickening around me. A chill pressed at my back, a presence undeniable. Reaching the top, I fought to relight the beacon, hands shaking uncontrollably. Behind me, the room grew colder, my breath misting visibly, and then, clearly, I heard footsteps climbing slowly toward me. Terror locked my muscles as I turned to face whatever had haunted my nights. Before me stood Frederick A. Jordan, his face pale and waterlogged, eyes empty yet full of sorrow. He reached out a hand dripping with seawater, his voice a mournful echo. "Leave this place," he whispered. "The sea demands a keeper. It took me, and it will take you too." Paralyzed by dread, I realized then the tragic truth. Jordan was not haunting the lighthouse out of malice, but out of a warning, desperate to spare others from his fate. He had been claimed by the sea, bound eternally to warn those who came after him, and now it sought me next. The storm battered the lighthouse relentlessly, as though alive and furious. Mustering every ounce of strength, I relit the beacon, illuminating the darkness and driving back Jordan's sorrowful figure, his form fading slowly into shadows. Dawn broke soon after, calm and silent, but I knew my days at the lighthouse were over. I left quickly, handing the keys back to Mr. Thompson without a word. He nodded solemnly, understanding everything I could not say. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the ocean's endless whispering, I remember Jordan's haunted face and the chilling truth he revealed. The sea claims its own, and sometimes it never lets go. I remember clearly the day my grandfather first told me about the old lighthouse. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as if the walls themselves were listening. He said a man named John Paul Carter once lived there, tending the light that kept sailors safe. But he was not just a lighthouse keeper. John Paul secretly brewed beer, selling it quietly to soldiers from the nearby fort. Eventually, something went terribly wrong. One night, a group of soldiers who had tasted John Paul's beer wanted more. When he refused, they became angry. They attacked him, ending his life right there in the lighthouse. Grandfather leaned closer, eyes serious, and said John Paul never truly left the lighthouse, his spirit trapped there, forever restless. For years I believed it was just a spooky story to frighten children, until the summer I stayed there myself. I was 17, working a summer job painting the old lighthouse to earn extra money. On my first night, things seemed normal. The sound of waves, the smell of salt in the air, and the lighthouse beam spinning slowly, throwing shadows across my room. But as I lay down to sleep, I felt uneasy, as if someone was watching me from the darkness. The next morning, I woke early and began painting, quickly forgetting my worries from the night before. Hours passed calmly, until I reached the basement door. As I opened it, a rush of cold air greeted me, strangely colder than it should have been in the warm summer sun. I stepped carefully down the narrow stairs, feeling a sudden heaviness around me. The basement was old and dusty, filled with rusted barrels and bottles. At first glance, everything appeared ordinary, but something caught my eye. In the far corner, one bottle stood apart from the others. Unlike the dusty brown bottles scattered around, this one looked clean, shiny even. Curious, I picked it up and noticed a label, barely visible, with the faded letters spelling John Paul. My heart skipped a beat, remembering my grandfather's story. How could this bottle still look new after so many years? Suddenly, I heard footsteps above me, clear and unmistakable. Someone was walking slowly across the lighthouse floor. I rushed upstairs, calling out, but the lighthouse was empty. Not a single soul around, just silence. That night, as I tried to sleep, strange noises echoed from below, faint laughter, whispers, and the clinking of bottles. Each time I got up to check, everything fell silent. I began to wonder if the lighthouse keeper was truly haunting this place, angry and unsettled. Days went by, and each day the feeling grew stronger. Tools vanished and reappeared in odd places. Doors opened and closed on their own. At night, my dreams became nightmares filled with a shadowy figure staring at me, eyes filled with sadness and rage. One evening, as the sun began to set, I climbed to the top of the lighthouse to repair a window. As I worked, a sudden chill filled the room. I turned quickly, heart pounding, to see a shadowy figure standing at the bottom of the stairs. It did not move, just stood there, watching me. Frozen in fear, I called out, asking who was there. The figure remained silent. Gathering my courage, I slowly descended the stairs, my hands trembling. But when I reached the bottom, the figure was gone. I felt dizzy, confused, doubting my own eyes. That night, determined to uncover the truth, I returned to the basement. As I stepped down, the air felt even colder than before. Something felt terribly wrong. In the dim light, I saw clearly now, the floor stained dark, with something old and dried, something that looked horribly like blood. As fear gripped my heart, I felt a hand gently rest on my shoulder, cold and firm. Slowly I turned, face to face with John Paul Carter himself, his eyes hollow, filled with sadness. His mouth opened slowly, speaking without sound. Yet somehow I understood his silent words. They took everything from me. His eyes seemed to say, voice echoing softly in my mind. I tried to step back, but he held me firmly, his gaze fixed deeply into mine. Fear turned into sorrow, and I felt his pain, his endless loneliness. As suddenly as he appeared, John Paul faded away, leaving me standing alone in the dark basement. Trembling, I climbed out, determined never to return. I knew now that my grandfather's stories were true. John Paul had been betrayed by those soldiers. His life cruelly ended for something as simple as beer. And yet, even in death, he could not leave. He remained there, forever trapped in sadness and anger. I left the lighthouse the very next morning, never looking back, but the memories never faded. I still wake at night, certain I hear whispers in the darkness, clinking bottles and quiet footsteps. I know now the truth about the lighthouse. John Paul Carter is still there, alone in the dark, waiting for someone else to hear his story, forever haunting the lighthouse he called home. When I was a kid, my grandpa used to say that lighthouses held secrets. He said they were more than just buildings guiding ships through the night. At the time, I thought it was just another old story, something to entertain us around the campfire. But after what happened that summer, I realized Grandpa had been telling the truth all along. It was late August when my family decided to visit an old coastal town. The main attraction was a lighthouse, standing tall above the cliffs. On our first evening there, we joined a guided tour, and as we climbed the winding staircase, everything felt normal, peaceful even. The guide spoke calmly, telling stories about the lighthouse keeper who once lived here, and his wife who watched the sea every night, waiting for his safe return. Something about that story made me feel uneasy, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks. That night, I woke up suddenly, feeling cold despite the warm summer air. My heart was racing, and when I looked around, I noticed the curtains moving softly, even though the window was shut tight. I told myself it was nothing and went back to sleep, ignoring the strange sensation that someone was watching me. The next morning, things seemed normal again, bright sunlight washing away the fear of the night before. But as we walked near the cliffs, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of something white fluttering in the corner of my eye, disappearing whenever I turned to look. My parents didn't notice anything unusual, but I knew something was not right. By the third day, my curiosity grew stronger, overshadowing my fear. I decided to sneak out after dinner and explore the lighthouse alone. The sky was cloudy, hiding the moon, and the lighthouse stood dark and silent. As I approached, the air felt colder, heavier, like stepping into another world. I climbed the staircase slowly, each step creaking beneath my feet. Halfway up, I stopped, hearing faint whispers echoing down from the lantern room above. My heart thumped loudly, but I forced myself to continue climbing, desperate to know the truth. When I reached the top, I froze in my tracks. There, standing near the window, was a woman dressed completely in white. Her long hair flowed around her, and even though her back was turned, I knew she wasn't supposed to be there. Slowly, she turned her head towards me, and my breath caught in my throat. Her face was pale, eyes wide and filled with sorrow. She didn't move towards me, didn't say a word, but the sadness in her eyes felt heavy enough to crush me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. She lifted a finger, pointing to the sea below. Compelled by something beyond my control, I looked down and saw the waves crashing violently against the rocks. Suddenly, a flash of memory, not my own, filled my mind. I saw a stormy night long ago, the keeper fighting against the wind, trying desperately to reach safety. I saw his boat smashing against the rocks, his voice lost to the roaring storm, and I saw the woman standing by the lighthouse window, helplessly watching her husband drown, unable to save him. When the vision faded, I gasped for air, trembling and cold. The woman in white still stood there, tears falling silently down her cheeks. For a moment, I understood her pain, felt her loss. Then, without warning, she vanished, leaving only the chill of her sorrow behind. Terrified, I stumbled back down the stairs and ran to our cabin, unable to sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my parents everything, expecting disbelief, but they exchanged worried looks and quietly admitted they'd heard similar stories from the locals. They said visitors often reported sightings of the widow, forever mourning her husband. We left the town that day, but the experience never left me. Even now, years later, whenever I see a lighthouse, I feel a cold chill down my spine, reminded of the ghostly widow forever trapped by her grief. My grandpa was right. Lighthouses do hold secrets, and some secrets are meant to remain hidden.